3, 2, 1. All right, this is my first podcast of Beyond the Blooms. That's the name of the podcast. Unfortunately, it's actually my third podcast. This is the third time I've had to do this podcast. The first time, I didn't actually press record on my microphone. And the second time, I did it perfectly and ended up deleting the footage by accident. Trying to make space to publish the podcast. So I deleted the podcast itself to make the podcast. So this is going to be my third attempt now. Hopefully no technical difficulties. It took me a good while to get the campfire going. It's lots of moisture in the air tonight. There was actually quite a bit of fog driving into this campsite. So I'm coming to you from parts unknown, somewhere in the Queensland bush near Sunshine Coast. Live from the studio today in the bush. And I have a professional microphone here on the stick. So my podcast, Beyond the Blooms, what's the name mean? I suppose it gives you imagery of flowers blooming and things like this, but where the name actually comes from is these mountain ranges in Ireland, in County Offaly, where I'm from, called the Sleeve Bloom Mountains. So when I was younger, this is where I would have been hiking and walking the dog since I was young. And my mother is actually from a small village near there called Kinnity. And her father, my granddad, actually lived in the mountains, farming up there. He owned a lot of land. They actually lived on the side of the mountain. So the Sleeve Bloom Mountains, where the name comes from, the Irish word for it is actually Slieve Blima. So Blima being a man who lived a long time ago. So they were named this because Blima was a warrior chieftain from Connacht, and he was chased out of Connacht. So he fled to the Slieve Bloom Mountains in Leinster. Now, he was described as being a giant of a man, actually, a big fella. And his grave is actually near the Kinnity Mountains still to this day. It's called the Giant's Grave. And it's just a bunch of strewn about kind of man-made rocks. You can tell that they were organized by humans. And they date to about 3,000 years BC, before Christ. So it's the ancient megalithic tomb called the Giant's Grave, where supposedly Blima was buried, the giant man himself. So that's where the mountains got their name from. But they're also quite famous in Irish mythology as well, with arguably the most famous figure in Irish mythology being Fionn McCool, who was the leader of the Fianna. And they were a warrior hunter band that went around for the highest chieftain in Ireland, basically doing jobs for him. Most of the biggest mythology in Ireland is based around him and his antics. And his father, Cool, spelled Cumhail, was actually murdered. And Fionn McCool's mother, Myrna, two warriors who were mates with Cool, took Myrna to the Slieve Bloom Mountains and she actually gave birth to Fionn McCool in the mountains themselves. And he went on to take part in some of the most important myths in what they call the Fenian folklore. So, including, they actually thought he was a bit of a giant as well. And they claimed that he built the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland to fight a Scottish giant. And there's also the myth of him eating the salmon of knowledge, where he actually he was cooking the salmon of knowledge for his mate who wanted the knowledge, and he burnt his finger and sucked on it, which gave him infinite knowledge. So he could actually, when he sucked his thumb in the future, he could actually see into the future and know what he was doing. So he was born in those mountains as well. Pretty much the most famous folklore hero in Irish mythology. So they're a cool place to be. They're actually also the oldest mountain range in Europe, which explains why they're so short, because they've been eroded over the thousands and millions of years, and they're actually 400 million years old. So it's an ancient place. It's not a spooky place, but you definitely get a strange sense at nighttime when you're walking around by yourself, if you're walking your dog in the dark. So I heard howling a few minutes ago. I was wondering if there's dingoes near this campsite, but I don't think there is. It's probably just dogs. So the Schliebler Mountains, that was my first foray into the bush. And then since coming to Australia, I've done Carnarvon Gorge out in the outback. So Beyond the Blooms is my foray into the more serious bush in a country where you get in more trouble if you get stuck out in the bush. But even a hiker actually died this week out in the bush, so it can happen. So that's basically why I named this podcast. So on this podcast, I'm basically going to talk about whatever things interest me, would you believe? So it's probably going to be topics based around wildlife and the outdoors and adventure and things and such. And I'll do some research on topics that interest me and try to link them together and just talk about them every couple of weeks. So the first topic that springs to mind is a few weeks ago, I was down in Bribie Island, which is, if you don't know, it's one of the islands in southeast Queensland, with the distinction of being the only island that you can actually drive across over a bridge, as opposed to getting a ferry across like you might do in all the other ones. So I was doing a bit of four-wheel driving down on the island, and I started to notice a bit of black sand in the dunes on the opposite side of the shore. So if anyone might take a glance at those dunes, they just assume it was the burnt ashes from the gum trees behind the dunes, which had clearly been through a few forest fires over in their years. They're very darkened. But the black sand wasn't the remains of the ash from those gum trees. And I had a feeling it wasn't, because I went on a tour to Gary Island last year, and they explained to us that the sand itself on Gary Island, or otherwise known as Fraser Island, was actually mineral ores in the sand as opposed to ash. So I googled it when I got home quickly and found out Bribie was the exact same. It had that black mineral ore, the same as Gary Island. So if you don't know Gary Island, there's a lot of big sandy islands in Queensland. Hopefully the smoke isn't completely covering the video right now. It was in my face a few minutes ago. Now it's going in front of the camera. I can't control it. But on Gary Island is the largest sandy island in the world, actually. With the beach being 122 kilometers long. And it's basically a highway where everyone drives their four-wheel drives up and down the beach. And it has the actual rules of a highway too, believe it or not. So it's absolutely massive island. And in 1992, it was made a World Heritage Site because there's a variety of unique geological processes and biological processes that go on the island. So first being the actual sand dunes themselves. So you have these massive sand dunes on the island, which formed over a period of 700,000 years. And they include those black sands, those weird sands that similarly I got on Bribey when I'm on Bribey a few weeks ago. Now, also on the island, it has the distinction of being the only place in the world where rainforest grows out of sand. So they have these huge canopy rainforests, and how it grows out of the sand. There's actually a unique fungus there. I'm gonna look up the word for it because I'm gonna absolutely butcher the pronunciation. So I believe it's pronounced mycorrhizal fungi. So the plant life feeds on this fungus which grows in the sand. So you have these massive rainforest trees, with the biggest of them being up to 3 meters wide and over 1,000 years old. So this is an ancient rainforest on this sandy island. And then you also have these perched water lakes. So what these are basically, you have these large depressions that form in these massive sand dunes. And over time, plant and tree detritus and waste builds up in the bottom of these sand dunes. And it kind of, over time, it starts to form this hard pan layer where it solidifies, and it makes it hard for the rainwater to actually seep through to the groundwater basin underneath. So you have this deep depression in the sand dune. The plant matter builds up over thousands of years and turns solid as it decays, and then the rainwater can't get through, which leads to some of the freshest water you'd find in the world in these lakes on this island. So Gary Island actually has the largest perched water lake in the world, with the most famous one probably being Lake Mackenzie on the island, which looks like a tropical beach when it's actually fresh water. It's like that kind of green turquoisey water, which is a very strange thing to look at when you think about it, and it's actually just fresh. But this water on the island, it's actually some of the most purest water you can get in the world. The only source of water with zero microplastics. So you have plastics on the very top of Mount Everest, and you have plastics in the deep dark depths of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part in the ocean. But on Gary Island in Lake Mackenzie, you don't have any microplastics. So that's just another feature of the island. And then maybe one more is the rainwater takes a long time to filter through that groundwater basin with the sand. So the creeks leading out to the ocean from the island, including the famous Eli Creek, which people can swim through, the water in that those creeks is up to 100 years old because it takes so long for the rainwater to process through that groundwater basin and come through the sand. So it's a pretty unique place with a lot of unique features. But the thing with it is it has a bit of a dark past. So Gary Island is the Aboriginal name, the original name, which has now been put foremost as the name people should say now. So the people on the Aboriginal people from the island, the Butchula tribe, they named Gary Island, which means paradise. But the other popular name, Fraser Island, has a much more dark past to it. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, in comparison to Ireland, where most Irish names for places, Oscailge, or in Gaelic, as some people like to say, most of the Irish names are anglicised phonetically. So they lost all meaning of the word and they just become these gibberish words. So like I said in the introduction to the podcast with the mountain rains, the sleeve blooms, the Irish word for that being Slieve Blima has lots of meaning, with Slieve being a mountain and Blima being the giant who lived in the mountains and died in the mountains. Whereas sleeve is kind of a nonsense word without that SH sound. And then blooms just makes you think of flowers blooming. It's nowhere near related to Blima being the individual the chieftain who lived there. So in Australia, the Aboriginal people have went off of a oral culture, so they don't have a lot of spellings for their words. So the Western people came over and spelt it for them, or they just named the place something else. So Fraser Island was kind of named as a warning. What happened to James Fraser on that island? Now, what happened was James Fraser, a captain of his ship, um, took his ship, the Stirling Castle ship, down to the east coast of Australia. Now, the strange thing with his journey at the time, which was a bit of a rarity, was his wife, Eliza Fraser, actually came with him. Now, the reason for this was he had a chronic health condition that he needed her to help him out with to keep him healthy on the journey. It wasn't very common at the time for the wife to go with the captain on his journey. And who knows why? Maybe he wanted to get with all the indigenous women and get away with it. But he didn't have that luxury because he was a very sick boy. So when they got down near Gary Island, which at the time was just called the Great Sandy Island, they crashed up on a reef near the island and they had to take their rowboats out onto the only place nearby, which was that Great Sandy Island. Now, apparently Eliza Fraser was pregnant on the rowboats and gave birth as well. And then apparently the baby died of drowning. So it was already a bit of a rough experience for her with their big main ship crashing. But now she's lost a baby and she's stuck on an island out in the remote Queensland. And the Butchulla people took them in, the Aboriginals on the island, and they helped them out as best they could with what they knew. But the problem with it was at the time, especially with Eliza Fraser, she didn't really perceive them helping her as help, and she perceived it as them being ignorant brutes when they're actually trying their best to help them out. Now, one example of this is she had really bad sunburn apparently, and they tried to apply animal fats to her to ease her sunburn, and she just hated that they did that to her. She assumed that they were trying to cook her up with animal fats to eat her. But what the Aboriginals did, how they ran the island, is they had a man country and woman country. So they split up the two genders to do the jobs during the day, with the men doing the hunting and fishing while the women looked after the children on the other side of the island. So they split up the survivors of that shipwreck to do the same thing. Now, they even trusted Eliza Fraser to hold one of their own babies. That's how much that they were putting their trust in these weird white people that landed on the island. But do you think Eliza Fraser took this with gratitude? No. She described the baby that she was given as, quote, one of the most deformed and ugly looking brats my eyes had ever beheld. So she was not a fan of the baby. Now, other examples of misinterpreted help from the Butchulla people was them trying to seal wounds of the sailors by burning their wounds, which is probably was a common thing at the time when they lacked medical treatment. But they took it as a sign of aggression. Now, the big controversy that happened was Eliza Fraser. She survived the ordeal, went back to Sydney, raised a lot of money for her experience, and went back to England. But you might ask what happened to her husband, James. Well, she claimed he was speared to death by the Aboriginals. Now, she raised a lot of money for herself, with some people claiming she's the original reality TV star from bigging up her experience on the island. But when the story was scrutinized from multiple directions, it just doesn't hold up. So first of all, if the men and the women were on separate parts of the island for their jobs, how could she have seen him getting speared during the day? That's the first kind of issue with the story. And then the second one was her fellow sailors on the ship completely didn't agree with the story at all and said that wasn't what happened, with them claiming that butch of the people actually tried to nurse him back to health with his chronic health issue. And then the final nail in the coffin of her wild claim that her husband was speared to death was the Aboriginal people would have created some kind of song and dance to repeat through the generations to remember um, them spearing someone to death, which they most definitely would have, because it's not every day a massive ship pulls up and all these weird pale people fly up on your island. I'm sure they'd have a tale or two about spearing their leader through the chest, which just doesn't appear. So she basically got the name for Gary Island as Fraser Island as a warning. Remember what happened to James Fraser. Remember how they killed him. And she went on to claim that the Aboriginal people were cannibals and all such things. And funnily enough, she did remarry quite soon after. So I don't know how much she really cared for her husband. So that's how the place got its name, with Fraser Island being on a warning about of the cannibals on the island, and then Gary being in just paradise, which I think sounds a lot better. So going back to that black sand you find on the island, there's a lot of uses of the minerals found in that sand. So the first two minerals found in this black sand that gives it that distinctive color are rutile and ilmenite. So these are both used to source the mineral ore of titanium, with it being sourced in the 50s and the 60s to create white titanium dioxide pigment, which is kind of used for plastics and things like this. But it would have also been used to create titanium metal itself, which at the time was quite important in the Cold War and the space race for spacecraft, regular aircraft, missile systems, and and other such things in the defense industry. So there's a distinct possibility that the titanium metal sourced on Gary Island could have been used on the Apollo space mission ships to bring people to the moon. Who knows? The line is there. It was very valued at the time for these reasons, and the US was sourcing it from the island. So who knows? And basically, the titanium was used for its resistance to corrosion. So on a missile or a spaceship or an aircraft, military aircraft, it would have been very important to avoid corrosion. Now, the second mineral found in these black sands is zircon. So this was mainly used for its in refractory linings because of its high resistance to high temperatures. So this may have been used in nuclear power plants to keep the heat. So the final mineral that was mined from Fraser at the time, or Gary, I should say, was monazite, which was used to source thorium. Now, thorium is a rare earth element that was used in fission in the creation of atomic bombs in the atomic age of the 1950s. So, not just would this black sand on Gary Island possibly have been used for spacecraft to the moon, nuclear power plants, but it may also have been used in the creation of atomic bombs with thorium, that rare earth element. So very diverse sand, not just burnt ashes in the sand. There was a lot more to it than that, and it's the exact same thing with Bribey Island. As I had Googled and found out that it was the same kind of elements found. And obviously there's no direct line from Gary Island sand to these industries, but it was one of the main sources at the time during the Cold War from the US for these different things, especially titanium, which was used for its strength to weight ratio, which is very important for military aircraft and missiles and such. So there's a weird possibility that the Gary sand could be could have been sent to space, to the moon, to put people on the moon. Now, another island in Queensland is a group of islands, I should say, is the Whitsunday Islands. So, whereas Gary Island has strange black sand, the Whitsunday Islands have strange white sand, with the most famous beach being Whitehaven Beach. Now, the Whitsundays were named by James Cook, who famously, I suppose, rediscovered Australia eons after the Aboriginals discovered it for the Europeans. So in 1770, he found the Whitsunday Islands and named them after it being Whitsunday, the day he found them, which is the seventh Sunday of Easter, which later turned out to actually be Monday that he found the island. But they kept the name, it just stuck at that stage. Now, Whitehaven Beach is a 7 kilometre long beach on the Whitsunday Islands. And it was famously even filmed in one of the newest Pirates of the Caribbean movie, which is probably a few years old now, but it's one of the most aesthetic places you can get in Queensland. And if you see any Visit Queensland ads or tourism for the state, it's probably the number one pushed image of the state is that Whitehaven Beach with those perfect tropical beaches and stark white sands, which stands out against it. Now, with the white sand, it has that unique look because it's actually 98% silica, which is basically almost pure quartz. Now, quartz is usually found in granite and sandstone and gives it that kind of pale look. And most sand around the world is made up of broken down seashells and coral, and only a slight percentage of quartz, whereas the Whitehaven Beach is nearly pure 100% quartz at 98% silica. But with this quartz, scientists believe it wasn't actually created around the Whitsunday Islands, but they think it came from other countries, and the erosion of quartz quarries and rock formations in other countries drifting over time for millions of years towards the location in Queensland. So with this sand, it's actually so fine and so pure, it squeaks when you walk on foot. And it's what they call chemically inert. So it means it doesn't retain heat and it doesn't stain even. So it doesn't even stain. But the strange thing with the heat retention is you could have the hottest day in Queensland and the beach of Whitehaven will still be quite cool to your foot because it just doesn't retain any of that heat from the sun. And interestingly, another thing, when I visited there with my sister, the tour guide told us it was a great exfoliant for the skin. So my sister thought it was a great idea to scrub her entire body with the Whitehaven sand, forgetting that she had applied a whole bunch of sunscreen, and scrubbing this exfoliate sand actually completely scrubbed off her sunscreen and led her to have burns all over her body, which probably wasn't the greatest use of an exfoliant. But with this sand, it's one of the purest sands in the world, with it having the smallest grains of any sand you can find in the world. So it's just so fine. Bit of smoke getting into my eyes there now. It's making me lose my train of thought. But this sand is so fine, they believe there's a bit of a rumor going around about it. Whereas there could be a potential link of the sands on Gary Island being used for the NASA missions. There's a rumor that NASA in the 70s sourced some of this Whitehaven beach sand to be using the creation of the Hubble telescope for the glass of the telescope. So if you don't know the Hubble telescope, it's on a satellite orbiting our Earth, I believe still to this day, and it takes pictures deep in outer space of planets and stars and galaxies. So it's done pretty much more than any other piece of technology for furthering our understanding of outer space and the universe by taking these deep space pictures, which helps scientists understand how old the universe is through seeing how quickly it's expanding. So it's a pretty mad piece of technology. And the rumor is the glass for this telescope was created with the Whitehaven beach sand. Because of that pure sand, it created the finest glass you could get anywhere in the world. Um, well, so that was the first topic there, comparing two different sands, black sands and white sands from two different islands in Queensland. And going back to Bribey when I was there a few weeks ago, after I saw that sand, I went on a little drive on the inland track, 4-wheel driving, and I decided to stop at this little rest stop that was right next to one of the estuaries that goes into the island, just to take a few pictures. And I seen an owl goanna lumbering about near the estuary. Now, if you don't know goanna, it's basically the Aboriginal name for monitor lizards, which are these great big lizards that can get up to 6 or 7 feet long. And they're absolutely massive things. If you don't know them, you might know Komodo dragon, which is in the monitor lizard family, except the goannas don't have that very dangerous bite that the Komodo dragons do with their toxic bacteria. I'm sure the goannas bacteria isn't too great for you either, but it might not kill you, I suppose. And I seen a goanna walking about down near the estuary, and I gave him a good 10 or 15 meters space, just to be polite, you know. But sure, I decided to start calling him like a dog, giving him down and calling him a puppy. And he decided to turn around and charge straight at me because he wasn't happy about that, I suppose, misidentifying him as a dog. And I pretty much, my heart dropped and I started sprinting as fast as I could. And my first thought was I wasn't wearing any boots. I was in my bare toes. Because anyone knows anything about 4-wheel driving knows driving in your bare feet is the only way to do it, because you get a much better sensation of the pedals on your feet. You get a much better touch for the driving. So unfortunately for me though, my first thought was I can't even kick this big lizard in the head if he gets so it catches up to me. And these things are fast as well. They'll waddle at you faster than anything. So I wish I had my boots that day, because I might have been able to do at least something. But the toes, the dogs were on show for the poor goanna, or poor me, I should say. But luckily, I turned my head about 2 seconds later, and he'd completely changed direction. So it was a bit of a false charge. I'm sure he was a lot more afraid of me than I was of him. So he faked me out and changed direction. Now, I could have been a lot more unlucky. As I got back, I mentioned it to one of my friends, and he told me actually his brother went to feed a goanna one time. He was cooking up some sausages at a campfire, and he thought it was a great idea to hand feed the goanna a sausage. And would you believe it? It just bit his thumb off, as well as taking the sausage with it. So I think that's probably a good tip for people traveling through Australia. A good underrated golden tidbit is don't hand feed goanna sausages, or you may lose a finger. And I know that's a crazy thing to think about, but it can happen. I've heard of it happening. So just try not to do that, if you can help it and remember, actually. Um, so this happened to me, and I got the biggest adrenaline dump you could get. My hands were shaking and everything, but I flipped it on its head straight away, and I just thought, what a joy. I'm being serious now as well. What I was grateful of the experience, because you'd never get something like that in Ireland, with how limited the biodiversity is and how sanitized the space has become from hundreds of years of agriculture and killing animals like the wolves and the bears, and them being functionally, they are extinct from Ireland. So what a blessing to be able to experience a wild animal in its natural habitat that isn't um it doesn't have to do what we want it to do. The bush is not bubble wrapped, and the animals do what they want, and they're not beholden to any kind of human laws or rules or regulations, and they're left to exist to do what they want. Um, and I kind of suppose this brings me on to the topic of biodiversity and dangerous animals being allowed to exist. So goannas aren't dangerous really at all. There's some signs in national parks warning they might charge you, but relatively compared to crocs and sharks and snakes, they're nowhere near as dangerous. But still, you never know with a wild animal. They're entirely unpredictable. And I've read a lot of books on wildlife management and such. And I suppose the first kind of point that comes to mind is climate change is a big buzzword and a big uh, topic for people. But one of the biggest parts of climate change in a negative sense is a lack of biodiversity in different countries. So biodiversity is just the variety of animals and plants you might get in an area. And if that starts to be limited and plant and animal species start to disappear from an area, the whole ecosystem can crash, which can actually further push the climate change away. So, for whatever reason, biodiversity is one of the smallest talking points when it comes to climate change, even though it is one of the most important. And um, you have I've heard things like, if it pays, it stays. So you have these charismatic animals that bring in ecotourism for safari tours or big hunts in Africa and things like this. And you get charismatic animals that people want to see or hunt, and they bring in cash. But a lot of the time, a lot of other animals go by the wayside because they're not valued for their supposed charisma that they provide humans, the aura that surrounds them. Um, so if it's not really about if it pays, it stays. It's about if it doesn't stay, we pay. Because if some of those animals disappear, the whole ecosystem will crash, and it'll bleed out into human beings. Because whether we like it or not, we're still a part of the ecosystem in the world. Um, we've just been doing our own thing for a bit, but the repercussions will come up eventually. So this is everything I actually did for my earlier podcast attempt that I deleted on myself. So that's everything that I needed to redo. So I'm going to forward this on to Sean in the studio 3 weeks ago in another bush spot, where two couple of kidneys were actually hassling me at the campsite, trying to shake me down for some snacks. So I'm going to push this on to other me in the other campsite, and a gluttia. I kind of one animal that gets a lot of controversy for its dealings with humans is the grizzly bear in North America. Obviously, they have a bit of a predilection for eating people. It's the odd time. But I read a book one time. It was called Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance by a Canadian academic, Stephen Herrero. And I was recommended this book by that famous writer Bill Bryson. He did a little hiking book on the Appalachian Trail, and he read that book to him as a bedtime story on the trail. and it basically frightened him out of his wits because there was black bears on that trail. Now, in that book, there's a quote from an old timer, so an old man in Banff Park, and he loved to bait conservationists, and he had a saying: "We've gotten along fine without dinosaurs for millions of years, and we could do just fine without the grizzly." So maybe he's right. Obviously, human beings are a very adaptable species. We can live in any environment, and so far, we've survived a lot of different things. But is the only reason for an animal to stay around, is it the ecosystem? Is it the money? Or is there something else to it as well? So obviously bears are quite important in their environment. They're involved in seed dispersal because of all the berries and nuts they eat. They spread it around, and their shite actually fertilizes the soil, same as slurry from cattle. And they also are involved in population control of elk and deer and moose, making sure that these grazers don't become too much of a problem and keep them from wiping out some of the flora around the place, some of the plants. And they're also involved in habitat modification, so they turn over logs and dig up roots and such, excavate soil to find tubers and insects, which turns the earth and keeps the soil healthy and creates little micro-habitats for small insects and other animals, like maybe small mammals might eat those insects. But the natural landscape in America probably still would be all right if they went extinct and people wouldn't be getting eaten. I don't think I'd be sitting in this campsite like this if it was in North America. A grizzly bear could run up on you any second. He'd see me sitting down here, I think that's a nice little snack for me. But a quote from that book I read was, "For many of us, the world would be a poorer place without bears. We keep bears because they are a part of nature and because of what they do for the human mind, body and soul. We track them through wood and swamp in search of a black bear rug to rest before a fireplace. We curse the same species when it eats all of our delicious ripe garden strawberries, but we also seize the challenge and plan how to have both strawberries and bears the next year. Our feelings are shattered when we find out that a bear has killed or seriously maimed someone, and for me there is always the knowledge that this would not have happened if there were no bears. So why do we keep them? We maintain grizzly bears because there is no other animal in North America that drives our imagination as does the great bear. Anyone who chooses to travel on foot, unarmed in grizzly country, has accepted a potentially dangerous challenge. True, the chances of injury from a grizzly are very low, but still very few people travel on foot in the grizzly's home without thinking about what they will do if they see one. All bear tracks, droppings, scratchings, even a few hairs become clues that a grizzly may be around. You ask yourself, how old is the sign? What does it mean? Was it made by a grizzly or a black bear? Suddenly the wilderness comes alive, and you may discover that the essence of wilderness is the challenge it gives us to use our common sense, to look after ourselves and our friends in an environment where the supports of civilization are few. If you see a grizzly, you instantly become one of the few who have shared moments with the species that cannot adapt to the domestication of North America, the species that defines one of the few types of wilderness we have left. Feelings of fear, inspiration, and awe may generate images of pristine North America when it was complete with bison and wolves, and when humans were still pioneers treading on the edge of something big and rich and beyond definition. Everything is known, unfortunately, today, less and less places to discover, but there is still the unknown. The behavior is unknown. Whether they are present is unknown. Humans want to control everything, but this has its cons too. So pretty much, I definitely felt this sentiment last Christmas when I went home to Ireland for Christmas. And I had done a nice bit of camping out in the bush in Queensland before I went home. And the stark difference to Ireland, which is obvious. It's not, maybe not obvious, but it's gone completely to the other side of the spectrum of lacking biodiversity for hundreds of years now. Maybe similar-ish environment to North America, but completely stripped back of any bears extinct there thousands of years, wolves extinct in 1798, I believe. And I'll go into it in a minute, but there's plenty of reasons why it's been stripped back. And I went camping in one of the only national parks in Ireland, Nephin National Park in Mayo. And just when I went camping and I was lying in that tent, I couldn't get over the silence. There was no birds, there was no insects. There's nothing. There's no rustling in the bushes or the trees. It's just so stark and dead. And I know that the West Coast is a bit rough and ready with the Atlantic, but just comparing that to Australia, where every campsite, I don't know if you can hear it now, but you just hear insects and birds you'd nearly hear a new bird species you never heard in your life every time you go camping. Or you hear animals rustling about in the trees. But just the difference was so intense. And what gives you more excitement than not knowing what's in the bush? If it's just dead and sterile, you don't even care. Where's the mystery? You know? So I think it's a pretty powerful thing to think about. But a couple other examples I can think of are definitely sharks. They have a lot of bad press around them for some of the right reasons. They kill probably, I think the average is 5 to 10 people a year globally, and humans on average kill 70 million sharks a year, mostly due to well, I don't know if it's mostly due to, but one reason is the shark fin soup. Chinese people have shark fin soup as kind of a status symbol of a wealth. It's one of the most expensive restaurant items you can get, even though apparently it's quite bland. And also sharks get caught in bycatch a lot, meaning when they have long line fishing where they throw out miles and miles of line with hooks, it's indiscriminate on what animals it catches, whether it's turtles or dolphins or sharks. And a lot of sharks get caught up in this because they're the uber predator in the ocean. Whatever bait is on those hooks, they'll zone in on it and die. So if there's a war on sharks, they're definitely losing heavily. 70 million to sharks dead to maybe 10 people a year. It's quite a drastic difference. But the thing with sharks is they're actually so important for their ecosystem. So as the apex predator, they have a couple different important factors in what they do for the ecosystem. So I believe it's called a top-down ecosystem, where the apex predator at the top, which have the least population, are nearly one of the most important aspects of it. So firstly, one thing they obviously do is keep the mid-level predators in check, which usually are just smaller sharks and rays as well. So they keep these predators down, which allows the more herbivorous animals in those seagrass habitats to survive. Because if the mid-level predators get out of control, they'll just eat everything. They'll be completely unstoppable. But one other thing I guess people don't realize about sharks is there's a thing called secondary predator effects, or otherwise known as the ecology of fear. So basically, sharks just existing in an environment frightens off a lot of animals in the area, would you believe? So even one example, I think in Shark Bay in Western Australia, tiger sharks in the seagrass environment actually frighten off dugongs, so the seagrass doesn't get overgrazed on. Because if that environment disappeared, then a lot of smaller animals at the bottom of the chain would disappear, and the whole thing would just crash. So sharks just existing somewhere terrifies other animals, and frightens them off, which protects some of the plant life you have underwater as well. So although they get a bad rap, they do have a lot of positives that they provide. And I suppose the most obvious thing people say is you're swimming in their home when you're there. It's their territory. So you just got to be safe about it as best you can, I guess. And a quick little animal as well I want to talk about is the vultures. They're another animal that's probably not as charismatic as your tigers or lions. They're ugly. They look like a, I don't know what, shaved, a skinny neck, bald man with a weird coat on, who you worry might flash you, and big disgusting beak, and they fly around when something's dead and just take advantage of a rotten carcass. Or if you're all, I suppose in how they're portrayed in movies, if you're almost dead, they're flying. They're like the Grim Reaper, ready to clean you up. But what people don't realize is they have very strong stomachs, and they have the ability to stop the spread of disease from carcasses, with their stomachs being able to break down things like botulism and very intense bacteria. So they're actually nature's cleanup crew, and they stop the spread of disease, especially animals falling into water supplies as well. They get rid of that bacteria that otherwise would spread. There's a fella walking around over there somewhere. It's either a goanna or an echidna. Checks. No, I don't see him. Back to what I was saying. So, vultures are another animal. They get a bad rap when they stop maggots and flies hanging about. They save the agricultural industry millions of dollars every year cleaning up dead carcasses that would have to be dealt with otherwise. This fucking, what is it? I swear to God, he's right there in the trees. Oh, he doesn't want to come out. But that brings me to back to Ireland. So Ireland, I guess what you could call is the result of unchecked war against the wild. There's two of them now. I think it's the two echidnas I seen earlier. Maybe it's a male and a female. They coming out or not? They're that loud in the bush you could nearly think there was a person walking about. Ireland's landscape has been devastated for a long time, with recent reports reporting indicating that nearly 85% of protected habitats are in unfavourable condition. So the stereotype of Ireland being the Emerald Isle, a green country, is really a bit of a farce. Obviously the fields are very green, but in terms of it being a wide landscape, it's pretty much non-existent. So some of the reasons for Ireland's complete lack of wilderness is intense agriculture. So approximately 67% of the country is farmland. So the use of pesticides, slurry and fertilizers, which cause nutrient pollution, aka eutrophication in watercourses, and the removal of hedgerows has destroyed natural habitats, reduced food sources for pollinators, and created a fragmented landscape where wildlife can't really safely move around because all they're offered is fields and roads. And this was accelerated by EU policies in 2015 for milk quotas, which drastically shifted practices toward dairy monocultures, where wet grasslands and floodplains were drained, which destroyed vital ecosystems. Where are these lads? I don't see them. So farming, obviously, big one there, 67%. Another one is forestry. So, um, deforestation, first of all. So, Ireland was pretty much completely made up of trees in the hunter gatherer times, pre agricultural revolution, or pre agricultural revolution, where it all got cut down for agriculture. So, um, one of the other reasons a lot of the trees got cut down was for building the British's famous navy, which came to Australia, went to the America, took over the world, and held it with an iron fist. The empire where the sun never set. That was from boats made by Irish wood. It had to come from somewhere, didn't it? But the other thing with Irish forestry, which makes up 11% of the country, is a lot of it is monoculture. So basically made up of one type of tree, the Sitka spruce, which 80% of the forestry in Ireland is made of this non-native tree, um, which it's a type of conifer, the Sitka spruce, and it grows so densely that the canopies completely cut out light from the forest floor, which prevents the growth of anything pretty much except for moss. Another reason for Ireland's lack of wild animals and plants is the destruction of our natural peatlands and bog that we have. That everyone, including my family, have been harvesting for years to create turf to burn in the winter. Um, but a lot of them are starting to be preserved now because they're crucial ecosystems for insects and birds, species, and plants. But the drainage of them, destroying those wet habitats, has turned them into ecological deserts pretty much. So pretty much almost 50% of them have been made unusable as an ecosystem due to this. And even historically, blanket bogs are a unique part of unique in the world as an ecosystem. So there are these huge bogs on mountainous areas that almost look like blankets because of the way they roll over. And they were formed by humans cutting down trees hundreds of years ago. But Ireland actually has 80% of the world's blanket bogs. And they actually became ecosystems over the millennia, even though humans are the ones who cut them down. And then you have invasive species, obviously the non-native plants like the rhododendron. So they're a really aggressive kind of bush, and they just outcompete everything. But the crazy thing is Ireland has almost no wild land left, with only 1% of the country consisting of native woodland. So the overwhelming majority of the country is completely non-native or industrialized for production. Um, a lot of land here privately owned. Most of the hiking trails are privately owned. The Slieve Bloom Mountains that I frequented are Sitka spruce, I believe, and they're just trees in straight lines. Um, so, and the trails themselves are nearly there just to take the wood out when they're harvesting the wood. But yeah, and the last thing I wanted to speak of as well is just the culture of littering in Ireland as well. When I first came to Brisbane, I was shocked how tidy the place was. And I don't know whether this is because it's ingrained in them as they're young to look after the environment, or maybe they have more sense of pride in their environment because of the unique wildlife they have with their marsupials and kangaroos and wallabies and koalas and emus and everything. And Steve Irwin pushing that. But I looked into the statistics a little bit for it because I was interested, was this just some anecdotal thing of me walking around thinking the place was tidy, or was there some more truth to it? So, so in Queensland, in retail areas, so obviously a lot of high human habitation in these areas, the highest concentration of litter per 1,000 meters, a kilometer, was 227 items. In an industrial area, it was 159, and a recreational park, it was 100 items per kilometer. Sounds like a decent bit. In a retail area, that's the highest one there. 227 items on average in Queensland per kilometre in retail area. And in Ireland, the on a rural roadside, so on a country lane road, there was on average 1,148 items per kilometre. So that's pretty crazy. And on coastal and beach surveys in Northern Ireland, they found an average of 4,000 items per kilometre. So 4,000 items per kilometre on a beach versus 200 items on a kilometre in a retail area in a city. That's almost 16 times the amount of litter on a beach as well, an area that's supposed to be pristine and preserved. So I don't know what it is about the culture that makes us trash the place. Maybe it's the crappy weather and the dark winter that just turns you depressed. Or maybe it's the fact that the Irish mind has already put in quits and threw in the towel for protecting the environment. It's already over, and maybe the mind unconsciously already knows that. So it's given in. It's hard to know. But I suppose going back to the goanna chase in me is where I went on a tangent about everything with this, is I think that the bush should be kept the way it is as best you can, because of the value it brings, no matter how dangerous it is or how annoying it is or anything like that. It has a value not just environmentally and economically, but also for the human soul, I think. So that's the first episode of my podcast, Beyond the Blooms. I'll probably post once every 2 weeks, and tune in if you're interested. Let me know what you think. Thanks. Good luck. Cha-cha. Good luck much.